Dr. Michele Goodwin is now joining us. She is a professor of constitutional law and global health policy at the Georgetown School of Law, where she also directs the Institute for National and Global Health Law. She is, like so many in higher ed who've gotten a bad name, a stunningly productive scholar who, I don't know how she gets done what she gets done, publishes both scholarly articles in peer-reviewed journals, but also books for a more general audience and opinion pieces that both educate us and offer, going forward ideas on some of the most difficult societal issues, from abortion to racism to voting rights. And I'm proud that she's joining us now. Dr. Goodwin, thank you.
Thank you so very much for inviting me on your show. It's a pleasure and privilege to be with you.
So I was reading this week a terrific and terrifying piece by Susan Rinkunas in the New Republic on how the GOP is rewriting what it means to be a person. And then I saw that a lot of that article is based on an interview with you, and I wanted to reach out. It was really, about what does it mean to be a human being in the United States and the Republican effort to change that. Would you shed some light on that for us?
I will. Thank you so much. We take for granted what citizenship means. We think it means the same for everyone who is born in the United States, and we don't understand what the historical challenges were to citizenship. For example, many people might think that the first suffrage movement in the United States was amongst women who wanted to vote. But it's an interesting entry point for us because it wasn't women. It was poor white men or working-class white men who were not allowed to vote. They were not seen as full citizens, even though they were white and they were male, because we had a system of government and laws that recognized full citizenship only amongst those white males who were wealthy and who owned property. And the first line of resistance and those who felt disempowered by that were other white men who were shuttered out. And the same has been true over time for women, all women, and quite explicitly for people of color and Black people who were enslaved and brought to the United States and then born in the United States. And then over a series of time and through constitutional amendments, we have seen the citizenship on paper unfolds for women and unfolds for Black people and others who are born in the United States. But that doesn't mean that the citizenship has always been real. And in these particular times, the GOP is seeking to rewrite citizenship and who a person is in many different ways. So on one hand, you have the Supreme Court of Alabama, a conservative Supreme Court, rewriting citizenship to say that embryos are citizens. You have, on the other hand, efforts to truly deny the full citizenship capacity of individuals when their voting rights happen to be suppressed. If we focus just in the reproductive space, we see any myriad of things that are just absolutely confusing, inconsistent, and new, and targeted primarily only against women. So, for example, when you have the GOP saying that, well, embryos are now citizens and children, fetuses are now citizens and children, it's only vis-a-vis criminalizing women who don't behave as the GOP wants them to behave when they're pregnant. But it's not instantiating embryos with citizen rights to sue companies that pollute the air that they're gestating, that the pregnant people are breathing in.
Yep.
Fetuses don't get to sue when there's been a car accident and the fetus may be injured, and so on from there.
They won't go to the census, won't change representation by counting fetuses. You used a phrase that, sometimes if you just say it right, the light bulb goes on for everybody. And I think you're the one who said citizenship gerrymandering. And I loved it. It made it so clear what's going on. But it also made it clear to me that Look, Republicans in the new Congress, they've already gone to work and they've endorsed bills to get rid of the 1993 National Voter Registration Act. There's a national abortion ban there. There's all kinds of stuff there. Even leaving the World Health Organization. I don't think any of this stuff, any of the abortion stuff, and any of the, like, we're going to leave the WHO, is actually about public health. There's no way to look at what they do, and particularly after hearing you use that word gerrymandering, and not think this is all about social control.
That's absolutely right. This is all about social control, and it has been. There hasn't been a significant and sincere concern about the health of girls and women. That was the argument that was being used before the Dobbs decision. That's the Supreme Court decision that struck down Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. Before that time, when there were conservative state lawmakers passing laws that would undermine abortion rights, they would say, well, we're doing this to protect the health and safety of pregnant women and girls. But the U.S. has the highest rate of maternal mortality in all of the developed world. It ranks 55th in the world. A woman is 14 times more likely to die carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion in the United States. And so that, too, that's information gerrymandering, because it's wrong. It's just blatantly wrong. So wrong that even the Supreme Court has had to acknowledge in 2016, in a case before the Supreme Court, it acknowledged that a woman is 14 times more likely to die in the United States carrying a pregnancy and delivery to term than by having an abortion. And yet the Supreme Court would overturn Roe v. Wade with this kind of information gerrymandering that would suggest otherwise.
Well, our society is confronting a real crisis when it comes to women. And this is not a crisis. I'm not even talking about women's health. I'm talking about women as citizens. In the last few years, women have done remarkably well. Enormously improved sort of attendance in colleges, graduation from college, beginning to have enormous roles in corporations around America. Wealth, the women are beginning to have wealth. It's, beginning to change. But they still get paid less for the same job. I mean, there's still that same fight, but yet the trajectory was a good one until recently. And now there's this. I mean, I'm still haunted and disgusted by a man from Illinois who wrote, Your Body, My Choice. And I hear, young men saying, oh, if your wife doesn't take your last name, then you're just a beta somehow. I mean, I'm very happy that my wife doesn't have my last name. She's got a great life and a great career of her own and a lot of talent. It wouldn't make any sense to ever call it something else. I worry about this, and I don't think it's the first time we've encountered this. Wait a minute, we need to be put in their place. What are we supposed to do?
I really appreciate the conversation that you're opening for this, because a few things come to mind, which is that it's true that we see this trajectory of more women in law schools, more women in medical schools, more women throughout education. And yet we see glass ceilings. Only 17% of partners in law firms happen to be women. Mm-hmm. In our Congress, we don't have a parity of representation, only about 30% women represented. We have state legislatures in this country. In fact, the Dobbs decision came about through the Mississippi legislature petitioning the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's a legislature at that time that was about 86% male, overwhelmingly white male. That does not look like representation in a state where over 50% of the population happens to be women, about 51, 52%. And so that's where we were even before. We had the hope and aspiration that we were chipping away at what had been centuries of discrimination. And this is one of the challenges. It's the same challenge or similar to what we see with vaccines, right? So there are people that say, well, we don't need vaccines any longer because, look, people are doing fine. They don't have polio. Well, they don't have polio because there's polio vaccine. So we've been doing a better job over time, but it's still been with effort. There is a time very recently, not centuries ago, but just decades ago, where women couldn't open up bank accounts in their own name, credit cards in their own name, where marital rape was still legal and permissible in states where women could not serve on juries. And that's really hard to believe at a time in which, for me, half of the students in my, in law school happen to be women. And to your point, we've now hit a time in which there are those who explicitly want to go back and say that women have come too far. And that really happens to be what's so discouraging, I think, for so many in this time. I mean, there are little girls now going into elementary school and middle school as mothers in this post-Dobbs world. How can that mean an equal opportunity for them in their future?
And the reason I asked the way I did, I'm going to stick with this just one more question, because before the election, I think I heard you say, states forcing women to carry a pregnancy to term that maybe they got from a rapist and then to deliver that kid is like a really ugly other chapter in our country because their body autonomy is taken from them. And you call it Jane Crow. And I go back and I go, okay, well, we had a huge civil war to end what we thought was what was then America's so-called race problem. We ended slavery and we had Reconstruction, and gosh knows, as soon as people could vote, we had a lot of black representatives coming from the South, and a lot of things were going in the right direction, as they have with women in the last few years. And then we had Jim Crow, and it got erased. And I am terrified that the Jane Crow you're talking about is aiming to erase the progress that's been made. And now that this election is over and lost, how do we stop America from turning our attention away to look at something else shiny and have to wait another 100 years, as we did with Jim Crow, for our real values to prevail?
Well, I see that in two parts, is that we may be in for a long arc here. The first Reconstruction, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment started in 1865. It was literally a century later, in 1964, 1965, that we get the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Will it take us until 2064 or 2065? I hope not. I very much hope not. Is it possible? Sure it is. But what must we do in the meantime? Well, it's really important that we stay informed. It's not a surprise that as part of the contemporary effort is to do away with books. Ban books, burn books, keep people away from learning about these important markers of our history. And so the first is doing exactly what you're doing, which is to keep people informed, because otherwise misinformation can be a very powerful tool in undermining civil liberties, civil rights, and protections. Information is absolutely key. And then with that, it's important that people do exercise their civil liberties. Voting still is important, and working around voter suppression is going to be critical. We see this with this past election. Elections do matter. Elections count. And I think one aspect of this election happens to be people also being deeply misinformed. We saw how much misinformation there was. So people must vote, they must communicate, they must learn, they must work together and collaborate and cooperate, and they must use their resources, not just financial resources, but other resources as well, and coming together with people and helping to lift up the people who happen to be most vulnerable. I think that that one of the more dangerous aspects of a society that is headed where we're heading is ignoring the most vulnerable people amongst us. And that is a real tragedy. You see the anti-immigration, you see the threats to deport people, all those various things where, in fact, this is a nation beyond indigenous people being colonized and enslaved people being brought here. It is a nation then that was built, you know, with the foundations being further secured by people who were immigrants. And I think that there's a lot to be said in embracing those who happen to have the least in our society, which really helps to lift all of us up.
I think so, too. And I wish this administration would just ignore the least powerful, but I think instead they're going to demonize the least powerful, and they're going to use them. They're going to cause them enormous pain. I worry about that.
That's right.
Our history has it in it. I don't know why we think we're immune. We're somehow different than people were in the past. Yeah.
We're not immune to it. And I would add to that, you know, when people think about a horror of the last century, they turn their attention to the Holocaust, and there's a lot of reason for that. But here's some things to think about in terms of the U.S. engagement in that regard. The Germans didn't think of eugenics on their own. Actually, the Germans adopted a model eugenics law that had actually been placed into law in Virginia, and then went before the United States Supreme Court in a case called Buck v. Bell in 1927. And it was at that time, in the 1920s, that the Germans, the Third Reich, saw what it was that our Supreme Court had upheld. In 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a law that provided for the compulsory sterilization of poor white people that states thought were unfit, that states thought that sapped too much welfare from them. And to think that there were lawmakers and members of courts that thought, okay, we can just eradicate a whole community of people who just happen to be poor and white, and that this is okay. And the Germans picked that up. And verbatim, the Nazi German law on eugenics was that law from the United States. But even more, there were U.S. lawmakers that once the Germans really got going, there were U.S. lawmakers that said the Germans are beating us at our own game. But that wasn't because there weren't efforts in the United States. Over 30 states passed eugenics laws. There were states that set up at states what were called bitter family contests. Where in the U.S., there were people being judged by how blonde their hair was, how blue their eye was, and that was before the Third Reich was doing that in Nazi Germany.
Well, I would say, you know, our country has had, you know, I think many other countries are like a race lands in a place, shares a language, and then the idea of a nation comes around them. That's never been us. We have had different races, different and so race and wealth have been sort of the dominant ideas that we have gotten wrong for a long time. Sometimes right, sometimes more right than other times. I don't want to be all negative. In fact, more right than most places in the world, but never easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true. But there's so much that information matters and narrative matters, and one challenge that we've had has been an honest narration of our past and the maturity to be able to look at that and grow from it. And I will say that the post-Holocaust story of Germany was reflecting on that, was thinking about it, was legislating in response to it. In the U.S., our post-colonization, post-slavery story was the erection of monuments to Confederate leaders in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. It was in the glorification. Yep. That's right. It was in the glorification of birth of a nation. It was in sharing a propaganda that intellectually we know was not true, but became a powerful narrative in our country that black women are just lazy and black men are sexually predacious. Themes that could not have sustained during the 400 years of slavery, but became very powerful tools during Jim Crow in order to paper over the horrors of American slavery. And so what we do a very poor job of is honestly narrating our past, not in a way of beating up the United States, but just honestly reflecting on who we've been so that we can mark better destinies for the future. We don't do that work. We haven't done that mature work, let's say, that South Africa attempted to do with its truth and reconciliation efforts and commissions. In Australia, New Zealand, where they've attempted that same kind of work. Instead, what we've done is significant investments in think tanks that come up with strategies like Project 2025 and other ways to burn books, change history,
or Project 1776. They'll just lie about our history. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And it does a disservice. And, you think about it this way. There's such a tremendous disservice that's done to American children who learn less about American history than their other children in Spain, in Germany, in France. They know far more about U.S. history than our own children do because we're too afraid to look in the rearview mirror and assess and deal with our past.
You and I've run out of time. I'm grateful to you for your work and for your spending your part of your Saturday here with us. Dr. Goodwin, I will keep an eye out for the things that you publish. And boy, are you going to be busy. Your field is right at the core of this battle we're in.
Thank you so much for setting the opportunity for me and others to be in discussion with you. Thank you so much.